is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, the book club. Childhood favorites. Covering Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. In this book, there is so much to be done every single day. It's so exhausting to read. It's so tiring, you guys. Welcome to Unspoiled. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha.
And I'm Gena.
Welcome to the show, Gena. This is your first Unspoiled time. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So tell everybody who you are and where you're from.
Well, my name is Gena Radcliffe. I am the co-host of the Kill by Kill podcast. I know that seems like a very odd match considering what we're talking about today, but it's a podcast in which we talk about horror movies according to the characters. We just finished up the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and then we're getting into Freddy's Revenge. I also write about movies and television at The Spool. Nice. I don't really talk about children's books there, but I love this book, so.
Yay! Yay, it worked. You guys, I'm screen sharing with you all now from Kindle. Yay. Can you see that on your end, Gena?
I can see it. Yes.
Sweet. I didn't know that you wrote for Spool. That's cool. Spool's cool.
Yes.
So this book means something. Like, I tend to, I put it out there in a couple different places that I'm going to be covering stuff, and people will come forward with varying levels of excitement about a particular book I've named. Why did you go for this one?
This is probably the whole series, the whole Little House series is probably my favorite book series from when I was a child. I'm dating myself a little bit in that they sold the set in Reader's Digest back in the early 80s, and
wow, I didn't know that.
My grandmother bought it for me. It was a box set that contained, I want to say, 9 books. No, this was after obviously the television series in the 70s, Little House on the Prairie, took off, and so all the books were they were republished with these wonderful Garth Williams illustrations in them, and I kept those books pretty much from like childhood up until my late teens, and passed them on to my sister. So it's been several times for me a gift to people who have recently given birth. I mean, the books they're probably about they start maybe like a third grade reading level, but even when the baby's not even born yet, it's like, here, take these. She's going to love them someday.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. Giving like a particular book set as like a baby gift for like eventually, because you can have them, moms can read to their kids before they can read, and then eventually it's theirs to read on their own. It's a good idea. So for me, these books there were two different like sets of books that my mother impressed on me as being some of her favorites when she was a kid that she got me to read. And the Nancy Drew originals were one of them. And the other one was all the Little House books. And I think I read all of them up until These Happy Golden Years. I think I didn't read that one. Which I hear is kind of depressing.
It's depressing. Yeah, that's like that's when Laura is, well, she's not really grown up. She's like 16 or 17, but she's already married by that point, and I think she marries Almanzo at the end of that book. But there's also at some point and then there's the first 4 years, which is that's the one after that. And that's the one people really tend to not read because she's not a kid anymore, and it's more kind of the farm life out in the prairie isn't as fun as it used to be anymore. Like, I think their house burns down, they lose a child at some point. It gets very heavy.
Yeah. And even these, like, I went into rereading this book with some trepidation because I know, like, recently Laura Ingalls' name was on a book award and her name was removed from it because of a lot of the racism in many of her different books. I went into this being, like, waiting for it, and I was really surprised. There's, like, one song that Pa sings at one point.
Yeah.
But other than that, I expected there to be like some Native American talk, and there was none. Which I don't know if they removed that or if it's just not there.
That doesn't really show up until the book that's actually called Little House on the Prairie. That's the second book. But there's I mean, it gets kind of cringy to read. I mean, you've got the whole shirtless savages and buckskins showing up and you're kind of being vaguely threatening to the family, and then at one point they get influenza and a doctor shows up and he's black, and Laura just expresses shock at this, not in a negative way, just in a, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like this before. And I think that the one that really kind of you kind of get that kind of grimacy face in is in Little Town on the Prairie, which I believe is the fifth book. There's they have a kind of a talent night, and Pa and a bunch of men, they do a minstrel show.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, there's no, you can't really like dance around it. It's a minstrel show, and I'm sure at the time, they would say, well, we didn't mean anything, negative about it, but in looking at it from a present perspective, that's not going to fly anymore.
And the things that I'm thinking of from Little House on the Prairie were, there's one particular quote where she says, "There were no people, only Indians lived there."
Yeah.
And then the only good Indian is a dead Indian gets said by several different people. And Pa is not it's presented in sort of a way as like, that's not cool, even in her mind as she was saying it, but it's still, so there's I just was really pleasantly surprised to make a long story short, that this book avoided so much of that, because I've always preferred Big Woods to Prairie, because of how much more instructional stuff. I was fascinated by this and Farmer Boy as well. Because
those are my two favorites. Those are my two favorites as well. And I say, and Farmer Boy, I think I like to think of it as baby's first food porn. Because the description of the food in Farmer Boy in particular, it's like, it's so you just vividly done, and this kid is constantly eating, and I get it, he works on a farm, you work up an appetite, but they have pie at breakfast, which is just like what an innovative idea, just a big old wedge of apple pie for breakfast, and then a full spread for what they would call dinner, lunch, or us, but like a ham and then dinner's like a 6-course feast with a goose and more meat and like 3 different kinds of pie. And again, this isn't like Sunday dinner. This is just what they had on Wednesday. It wasn't any sort of special occasion meal.
Yeah, I like that, because I'm a huge cook, and I love food and description, and I never really thought about it. I've always thought about it as just like the learning about how things were done and made, but you're right, it is just so specifically food heavy, and other books that I have loved as a kid were also very food heavy, so I think I'm seeing a trend like the Redwall books. It's just he loves to talk about food, so all right, how long had it been since you reread this?
I actually tend to reread them not the whole series. Again, I do tend to skip over the last couple ones. My favorites in the series are Big House, Farmer Boy, and I really like On the Banks of Plum Creek, which is notable because that is the first appearance of Prairie Bitch Nellie Olson, which is when she's like they're little in this one. They're like 6 or 7 years old, whereas in the TV series they were maybe preteens. But Nellie Olson pops up a lot in these stories. She's in banks of Plum Creek, and then she shows up more in a little town on the prairie, which is kind of more the Nellie we know from the TV show. But yeah, I love in Plum Creek she has a birthday party, and it's just so fussy. They serve like tea and little cakes, and then like lemonade. And Laura had never tried lemonade before, and it was just the most amazing thing she'd ever had. But Nellie and her brother were like such little snots and wouldn't let anybody play with their toys. And then there's a great scene later where Laura in turn has her birthday party. She has it in this, this house that's basically, it's built into the side of a hill. And so for playing, they decide to go down to the river, and Nellie gets like leeches all over her legs. And it's just such
yes.
And I don't think they ever did that in the show, and I wish they had, because it's such a great scene.
Oh, so, okay, confession, I have never seen the show.
Really? Okay.
I saw like 10 minutes of it, and I couldn't take it. I was little when I saw it, and I was just like, nope, I'm sorry, this is not for me. I'm really glad that you warned me that they don't do the leech thing, because I think I would have been waiting for that, because that's so satisfying in the books that she just like...
Yeah, they leave out they don't really go into... Big House at all. Or they start probably around the time that maybe Plum Creek started, going by Laura's age and all. They leave a lot of that out, which is, again, to me, the most interesting part, as you say, is just how much, daily work goes into to keep this little tiny house in the middle of nowhere going.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like really what it is there's a self-sufficiency to this story that, like, here in this location, that, not to say that they're not still doing it for themselves most of the time on the prairie as well, but there is a lot more commerce and a lot more moving around, and so they don't build as much, not until they like get to where they're going to settle near town later on. And so there's a lot more buying and a lot more social, like, which I did find somewhat interesting, like the way that people interacted and the weird restrictions in what you were supposed to say and do and who you were supposed to be around. I, as a kid was just like, this is very restrictive. But what I loved about Big Woods is that it's like a self-sufficiency in this one area where they go to town occasionally for these things, but they could really mostly, other than like making clothes, be okay if they couldn't get to town, but also that their family's around. And I miss that a lot later. They move away and they're not near anybody anymore that they know. It's just friends, but not actual family that they've like been nearby this whole time. And I feel like that's probably a bummer for, I think most of these people are related to Pa that live nearby. Because I think it's Ma's family that I think is in New York, I believe, and it's Pa's family who's like kind of spread out around the Midwest. So yeah. I mean, when they do go to, like, there's a really great sequence where they go to a sugaring party. Yeah. That is like Pa's family. Yeah. Yeah, all right, so let's start this off. When we begin the story, we just get introduced to the house and where it is, that it's deep in these woods, that there's hardly anybody around, and we find out that, like, right away, these girls have never been to town before. Which I've read plenty of stories where there's somebody who's been in like a small town, and then they go to see the city, and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm overwhelmed." But this is so unusual in that this is this is a memoir. This is a real recounting of her experience as a little girl who had never seen two houses, never mind like 5 or 6, sitting next to each other. And that is bananas to me.
Oh yeah, I mean, for a straightforward story about a little girl growing up in the in the 1800s, there's a lot of sense of wonder to it, and I think that's why it holds up so well. And like, I not to jump to another story, but I think it was Prairie, one thing that these books have a running theme is they always have a chapter that takes place at Christmas time, and it's just they're like the best chapters. They're so wonderfully vivid, and how they prepare for it, and again the food that goes into it, and the gifts are so laughably simple but you have to think in terms of how a kid in 1860 something would have taken, like at the Prairie, she gets a penny, like literally a single penny in her stocking, and she just literally just like she'd never seen her own penny before, and it's even as a kid I was like, a penny, really, girl? Like a penny and an orange, I think were her gifts.
That sounds right.
And I was like, well, yeah, I guess if you're like 6 or 7 years old in 1865, I guess getting a penny would be like being 6 or 7 now, getting a $20 bill. It'd be that'd be a big deal. I mean,
there's I don't know if you've ever listened to this podcast, The Complete Guide to Everything.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a moment in this where they're discussing like toys. Because they do episodes on all different topics, and they did one when Toys R Us was closing, and they were talking about all the toys and how they would be so excited about things when they were little, and that they would like get something that they wanted, and then they'd realize that it could only do one thing, and then be kind of bored with it. And they talk at length about how little it took to entertain kids at one time, and how obviously spoiled they are, that there's this amazing fucking thing that somebody bought that looks exactly like a truck that lights up and rolls around and makes sounds, and that they're like, oh, whatever, bored now after like 10 minutes, where the big exciting thing for Mary and Laura is that they get a pig splatter to blow up and spat around.
Yeah, and
it's just like, oh god.
And while Mary has an actual like handmade rag doll, Laura's doll is literally a corn cob. I'm just picturing this sad little dried out corn cob with like a rag tied around it. And
I just read this, and I had already forgot about the sad little corn cob, because there's a picture of her holding it.
That she named Susan the corn cob doll. But she's fine with this corn cob doll. It's like as the stories go on, she kind of starts to get a little envious of the attention that Mary gets, because Mary's got the beautiful long blonde hair, and she looks like a little China doll, and Laura's got brown hair and looks like her dad, and who gives a shit, but she's happy with this little wizened, dried out corn cob doll.
She even says to herself, like, it was a good doll. I'm like, was it? Okay.
I just want to picture her like little eyes drawn on it. It sounds like when we talk about it, it sounds like a parody of someone talking about how miserable and poor their childhood was, that they had a doll made out of a literal corn cob, and she loved it. She loved her corn cob doll.
We played basketball instead of a basket. It was a rib cage. A rib cage.
It's like Raising Arizona. And there was no crawdads. We ate sand.
Oh man. And yet, like, it really is written in such a way that it's still beautiful, because she gets across just how satisfied she was, as a kid. She doesn't know what's out there, even though she has a sister with this doll. She's just kind of like, yeah, well, probably eventually I'll get a doll, but she's the oldest, and that's how it goes, and just takes for granted that this is fine, and I really enjoy how content she is most of the time, I guess that having nothing else to compare things to, that will tend to happen. The only thing is, like you said, her being self-conscious about having brown hair instead of golden hair. And as a brown-haired little girl reading this, I was like, why do you fucking keep talking about this, though? You're really making me feel bad about it.
Yeah, me too.
Right?
Is it such a bad thing?
And, spoilers for later books, but eventually Mary goes blind.
Yes.
And she just winds up having such a harder time of it. And it's just this sad sort of irony that this girl who had been really just wanting to be more like her sister in so many ways then eventually becomes the one that has to take care of her sister because, you know, because Mary, if she had kept her sight, would have been the, like, perfect wife, right? Mm-hmm. She was just so obedient to Ma from the, like, just like a perfect model tiny woman, basically, who was always worried about, like, being neat and tidy and following the rules and doing things properly and having manners and whatever. And there's something really, like, poetic, and I hate to say that because I'm not trying to minimize what she actually went through as a person. It would feel more okay to say poetic if this were fiction. But there's something about that that's just like a reminder of don't be super envious of other people because you just never know what they're going to wind up having to deal with that you don't. And your situation in the end might be much more preferable.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, and again, as we pointed out earlier, the later books do become a significant bummer. Yeah. I mean, and the real life family ran into there was another child. Like I think there was a son in the family at one point in real life, but he died as a child. She just kind of left that one out of the story entirely. Yeah. I mean, this is a family that met with a lot of tragedy, which, I mean, to be fair, that was not uncommon in the 19th century for families to lose a child at some point. I think it was kind of met with, rather more stoicism than it is now, because it's, that's just the way, again, a lot of stuff could be explained with, that's just the way it was. And you can sort of apply that to her, childlike attitude towards, Indians as being, scary monsters and showing up out of nowhere. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but, we realize that's how it was then, but, that's maybe not, we don't want to kind of look back on that now. I mean, we got it. We understand how people, quote unquote, used to think about people who look different from them.
Yeah, and can we just skip over those parts now and just talk about how they made bread?
Yes, yeah. I want to know more about. I want to know about maple sugar candy and how it literally just seems to consist of just picking up some snow, melting some sugar, putting the sugar in the snow. Boom, you got candy somehow. Okay, that sounds good to me.
There were so many things that I was just so jealous of. Like, the fact that they used maple sugar to sweeten everything as their daily sugar, and they kept plain white sugar for company. And, maple sugar is crazy expensive now. And as a little girl, I loved it. It was like my favorite thing. If I got a treat, like when we went to Sturbridge Village or somewhere, I always wanted to get maple sugar candy. And the fact that that was what they used for their main flavoring and everything, I remember as a little girl just being like, lucky. It's their ordinary, like, garbage brown sugar. And I was just like, that's gold. What are you talking about? I'm going through this a little bit for those of you who are in the Crowdcast, that you can see some of these illustrations, because the book that I had as a kid was not in color. It was all black and white illustrations. Same illustrations, just in black and white. There's wonderful Garth Williams illustrations. They're so beautiful. They really, and I'm glad that I opened the book, because I was going to read it on just my Kindle, but I opened it on my phone just to check, and my Kindle's in black and white, and I was like, oh shit, I'm just going to read this on my phone because I want to see all of these in color. I never had seen them before. I love that. And they really are. That's one of my favorite pictures. The bear looks surprised. Right? He's looking up and holding this pig, and it's just like, what the fuck? And yeah. And it's over for you, bear. Sorry. That's a real, that's the kind of moment in a video game where you're just like, nice! You caught a pig too! Twofer! That's how I can relate to this, guys, is video game collecting, supplies and stuff, because this is, so far removed for how I relate to the world. But yeah, just the text there, you can see that they're going to see the extreme detail about, the phrase now that a lot of hipster restaurants use is farm to table, where it's just but that's exactly what's going on here. Pa will kill something and they will literally use every bit of it. Just every bit, even as you say, turning a part of them into a child's toy. Here's the bladder. We'll turn it into a balloon. We're going to put a stick up the pig's tail so you can roast it for 20 minutes because you're so excited about it that it's like the treat of the year to have the pig's tail. Have you ever had pig's tail?
I have not.
Me neither. Have you ever had head cheese?
No.
Would you? Would you be willing to try it?
I've had liverwurst. I've had scrapple, which scrapple apparently is kind of similar to head cheese.
And scrapple's banging.
Yeah, scrapple's delicious. I think scrapple is basically head cheese without the kind of gelatin in it, and I think it's the gelatin that turns me off to it more than anything else.
Yeah, I have a weird relationship with aspic specifically when it's like really fresh off the bone and it's colored and flavored like meat. I'm like, on the one hand, it's revolting. You know, it's like it's this weird like urine color and jiggly, and just on the other hand, I have this sort of visceral, like, I know that is full of nutrients and super, super good for you. And a part of me just hates to waste it. And I guess if you heated it up, like, do you eat head cheese still jiggly, or do you fry it in a pan like scrapple? I imagine you jiggle it.
Yeah, because I've seen it sold at delicatessen, so I'm assuming you just have it sliced up and just eat it on bread. I don't really know.
I wonder about that. Now I'm curious. I want to try it. Like, I bet if it's like on some good bread, it would still be good. I went to a Polish restaurant once, and instead of butter with the bread, they gave you bacon fat.
Oh, wow.
And it was super good.
I was going to say.
Shocker, bacon fat's delicious.
That sounds decadent as hell.
Yeah. It had little bits of like bacon crumbs still in it. It was obvious that this was like fat that they kept in the kitchen, that they, were making shit and they saved it themselves. And that was really good. So maybe I'd be all right with head cheese, but it is really like the whole idea of it, and being called head cheese.
Yeah, that's definitely a sticking point. If it was called, at least scrapple. It's it's what it is. It's the name. It's scraps of meat. It's God only knows. It's you pardon my language, it's basically snouts and assholes. But it sounds more appealing. Just it's scraps of meat. It's basically what's left over after the sausage is made. But why would you even call it? It's neither cheese nor presumably has any parts of a pig's head in it, although it might, who knows.
It does, though, because that's what she boils.
That's true. But why call it cheese, though?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't want to think about it anymore. You know what? I'm sorry I brought it up. Forget it. I'm moving on. And yeah, this picture of when because like he tries to shoot this bear that comes and tries to steal their pig, and he misses. And then later on, he finds this bear plus a pig, and it really like works out quite well for him. And this is when the book starts. We're in deep winter, and we're just starting to get into the time of year where everybody has to stay inside all the time. They're in Wisconsin, so the cold and the snow is very real. And I didn't remember, because I haven't reread this at least 15 years. Like, longer, probably. And I didn't remember how she has this set up to be a lot like seasonal. It's not jumping around different stories. It's a very deliberate winter, spring, summer, autumn. And I really love that setup. It just gives you an overall feeling of the cycles that things went through and why some things were so special because you only did them that one time of year, and how exciting it was when it came around again. And this thing was one of the only main things I remembered, and I was just talking about it a couple days ago with somebody, that Ma would color her butter with carrot juice so that it would be yellow because she didn't like white butter, which just seems like such a frivolous thing to worry about.
Yeah,
when you're first trying to stay alive, but also I'm like, all right, you know what? If that's the one thing you're going to pick, fine, go ahead.
Get some pretty, give yourself some pretty butter. You deserve it.
Right, exactly. You work hard, Ma. Go ahead. And I really want to see, like, because they mold the butter with little strawberry leaves on top. There's like a little mold that they press the butter into and everything. There's just so much about it that's so while everything is more hand to mouth and they have to be concerned all the time about making it through, there are things like that are just pretty and for the sake of it. And I like that being dropped in here and there. Like when Pa makes her that bracket for Christmas and he carves it with all of these different like birds and vines and the moons and stars and stuff. And when that kind of thing pops up, how special it is for them because they have to be so practical so much of the time.
Yeah, and she has a little China doll that she keeps on it, and she mentions the doll a lot, and apparently Ma had grown up, and I used to be really heavy into reading about Laura Ingalls Wilder and like the true story. Like Ma had come from some money, and this China doll had been, you know, something that belonged to her since she was a child, and she like just brought it with her through every phase of her life. So her, you know, putting this, you know, him making this shelf for the express purpose of her putting this little doll on it, that was just, you know, that was a very manly, you know, expression of his you know, appreciation and value of things that are important to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I wonder because, you know, by the time we get in, we start the story, and Laura's how old? Like at this point, 5 years old.
She's 5 or 6. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to wonder where Ma learned to do all of this stuff, because Ma knows how to do fucking everything. She knows how to make butter. She knows how to make cheese. She knows how to like to separate like different cuts of meat and use them in the ways that are most appropriate for like their toughness or whatever. She knows how to make hats later. She's fucking making straw hats from scratch. Like, but she comes from, like they say, she was a fashionable woman back east. She comes from a family where I would assume this stuff isn't going to be part of what you're taught, I would think. And so I'm curious about Ma's history a little bit. And how she learned how to do all of this. Like, I wonder if she was taken under one of Pa's family's wings and taught how to do this by, like, one of his sisters or somebody who knew, you know?
Yeah, that's possible. Or she just kind of paid attention to, you know, whatever the help in her house was doing when she was growing up. Or she just kind of figured, well, I guess I better learn how to do this sometime. And you know, it's kind of winged it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was thinking, like, the help in her house, but I guess I assumed that she wouldn't have lived somewhere where the help would even be doing this stuff. That you go to town and buy a hat, you know?
That's
she
true.
Wouldn't watch
That's
somebody
true.
make it, but I don't know. Maybe she did. But, because I always sort of, as a kid, you know, Ma is the much more socially conscious and repressed of the two. Pa is the one that's much more freewheeling about Laura being able to do things that are typically boy things, especially later on once they have more of a farm. And Ma's the one that's like, you know, she's anti-Native American, much more so than Pa is. She's insists on Laura like putting on her wool stockings because it's the 1st of September, even though it's like 87 degrees outside. I remember that one from a later book. All these things that I always was just like, Ma, you are a drag. But reading this, I'm like, Ma, you are a badass, actually. Like, you can fucking run shit. And that Pa at one point says something like, nobody's going to starve with you around, Caroline. And she's like, not as long as you can provide for us. And I'm like, you're not fooling anybody, Caroline. Like, thanks, Pa, for doing some shooting, but, like, you'd probably be able to manage that if you needed to.
Yeah. I mean, she, you know, as you know, offensive to modernize as the scene is now, she is, you know, able to, you know, kind of, you know, run off the natives with, you know, just her pluck and steel. You know, she doesn't have to, you know, scream hysterically for help or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, she's so I like rereading things from when I was a kid. And having moments like that where, you know, I didn't like Ma. She was really irritating. And now I'm just kind of like, man, I wish I knew half as much as she knows. I wish that Ma had sat down and like wrote a book about exactly how some of these things are done. Like, you know, honestly, this book gives pretty in-depth instructions about a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, you can. Yeah, I mean, apparently there is a book out that came out some years ago called The Wilder Life, which
I want to check that out.
If you like these books, it's a great read. It's very funny. It's about a woman who is obsessed with the books and the TV show, and basically tries to do some of the stuff. She tries to cook some of the stuff. She goes to visit some of the landmarks, like where the house, the Plum Creek house was, and there's I think in near where they settled in Prairie, there's a museum there, and so it's a very funny book. But one question I wanted to ask you from rereading these books. Were there any words or terms in there that when you were a kid you didn't really quite know what they were talking about, and then it hit you as an adult? Oh, I know what that is now. Okay. Like for me, like it was a repeated use of the word fascinator, which I couldn't picture what that was. And I'm like, oh, it's those little like hat type things that women wear now. Okay, I get it down. And I remember in Little Town on the Prairie, Laura talks about getting something that Ma refers to done to her hair as lunatic fringe, and I was like, I have no idea what, and it's their bangs. They're talking about she's getting bangs, and
right.
and Ma does not like the bangs. She thinks it's unseemly to have hair like hanging on your forehead.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I remember lunatic fringe, like now that you say it.
Yeah, and it was like this new, like no one had ever done this before trend that all the girls were doing was getting their hair cut so it like kind of goes in their forehead a little bit, and Ma was not having that.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been watching Deadwood for a Spoil Me commission. Have you seen that show?
I've seen the first couple episodes. I kind of fell away from it, not because of quality issues. I just fell away from it.
Yeah, it's the women characters are pretty impressive in that show. I would recommend it to anybody. Although I'm like partway through the first season, so who knows how it ends up. But yeah, the women in that show, they have them wearing very period accurate hair, and it straight up a mullet, really. Like because they're cut so short, almost their whole head is bangs. Except for the very back so that they can like loop it up and braid it and everything. So I guess that must be like slightly later on, like the bangs became the first part of the trend and led the way to it eventually just being a mullet. So
right.
I feel like I kind of have to side with Ma on that too, because like they took it too far and maybe we shouldn't have gone down this road at all. Bangs are always they're a gamble. And, I had bangs a couple years ago, and like I kind of still do, my hair being shorter. But I look at pictures of me now with bangs, and I'm like, why'd I do that? Why'd I do that to myself? But yeah, I can't like the fascinators. I didn't even like catch that. Was that at the dance?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a mention of them in that one, and then there's it happens a lot. It's mentioned a lot in the later books when Laura becomes a teenager, and they focus more. They focus more on how she's dressed and all because she has to start looking more ladylike. And I was like, I have no idea what a fascinator is, and then I realized like, oh yeah, it's those things that like old timey ladies wear. I mean people still wear them now. I mean you look on Etsy and there's like hundreds of listings for fascinators. So if you kind of rock the whole vintage 40s look.
Or if you watch The Royal Wedding.
That's true. Yeah, the royals are very big on fascinators.
They went nuts with those things. It was just like. I had a friend a few years ago when there was the first wedding with William, and she dressed for Halloween as his aunt that had that big like pink like loop in the front of her head. Yeah, remember that one?
Princess Eugenie, yes.
There goes a bold woman. Yeah, there's nothing really that this time around I don't remember knowing what it was before. Except for one thing that I remember reading, and I just sort of was like, that's weird, and I don't know why that's there, but I don't really care, and I'm going to keep reading and ignore it. And this time I stopped and was like, okay, now what is this, though? And that's when Ma is boiling corn, and she scoops all of the ash out of the stove and puts it in a bag, like a cheesecloth, and dumps it and puts the whole bag with ash in it into the water to boil the corn.
Yeah, is that she's smoking it? Maybe.
So I looked it up because I was like, I know that I have read about lime being used in cooking corn as well, and I don't know what this is, and I need to know because I'm just like very distracted reading this right now, just trying to figure it out. And it turns out ash is really alkaline, as is lime, and there's one other thing that people can use, and when you boil corn with something that's extremely alkaline, there's like a cellulose around each of the corn kernels that is very, very hard. And it keeps, like, if you ate it without treating it with this stuff, your body would not succeed in completely breaking it down, and a lot of the nutrients would just go to waste.
Oh.
So if you use this alkaline addition to the water, it breaks down that cellulose and makes it so that it's not only easier to like make it into cornmeal, and it's easier for your body to digest, but also it makes it so that it's sticky, so that if you mix it with water, you can make like a dough out of it. Whereas untreated cornmeal, you mix water with it and it's like sand. Like it just falls apart and it doesn't. Right. Yeah, so I thought that was really, like, that's the kind of thing I mean when I'm like, how does Ma know this stuff? Like,
right, exactly.
Her,
like,
right?
How would it even occur to someone to try that?
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to more than anything, is not how does Ma know, is how did somebody figure that out? Who was the first person that was like, let me put ash in this pot of corn?
It's like, either this will work or it'll be a total disaster and I've wasted an entire pot of corn.
Really, it has to have been an accident. Like somebody dropped a cinder in. Yeah, and they were like, "This
probably.
corn's way softer. What happened?" Like, right?
My corn's never been so chewable. But yeah, like this page here, this is a good example of the style that this book is written in. It's a manual on how to you prosper in the woods. It's just showing the step by step involved in Pa lovingly cleaning his gun.
Right. And it's easy for me to want to like roll my eyes at how a man clings to his gun, but it's a totally different situation when this man is literally relying on it to keep him alive, when there's like panthers chasing him down in the woods and fucking bears roaming around and
it's a tool. Yeah, it's a tool for him. It's not
exactly.
It's not like an extension of his manhood or anything.
Yeah, and I love this because the book is interspersed. It's a lot of day-to-day goings-on from Laura's perspective, and then it's a lot of stories that Pa tells or that she overhears other people telling each other. And they're not like, they're not huge. There's not a lot of plot to the stories. Pa forgets to get the cows in because he gets distracted playing in the woods, and then he gets chased down by a screech owl, thinking that it's like a ghost or God knows what. Sprints back to the house where the cows are standing there like, hello, we've been waiting, sir. I don't know what you're doing. And then his dad is basically like, so you completely ignored me telling you to go take care of this immediately, and I'm going to whip you now. A lot of whipping kids.
Yeah, there are. There's a chapter that goes into how on Sundays they could not do anything, like literally nothing. They couldn't read, they couldn't play, they couldn't do chores. They just sat there and they sat there and they sat there. And Laura, understandably, she throws a tantrum, and then Pa gives her a smack and then tells her a story about how when he was a little boy, he and his brothers snuck out on a Sunday and went sledding, and they like ran into a pig. and that's a great story. That's the illustration for that is illustration. Great. It's a great, because again, like the bear looking surprised, the pig in this just looks terrified. Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah.
I love this with them sneaking out. That's a really good illustration. And the fucking severity on their father's face. There it is. Yeah, they sneak out and they're sledding down this hill, guys, and a pig just like steps into their path and is standing there dead still, and they can't like direct the sled, so they just scoop it up. They can't help it. And they had been trying to like sled quietly because their dad's asleep, but as soon as they scoop this pig up, It's like, understandably, as I also would be.
As one would be, yeah.
If I were unexpectedly scooped up on a sled by three strange boys. And yeah, their father, like, you know, beats them each for doing this. But I can't imagine, like, their dad must have been so glad that this was happening outside while he was in the house alone, because he must have been dying laughing. Right?
I'm sure, yeah.
Like, you look out the window and you're like, what the hell is going on? And then you see, and you're like, they're breaking the rules and they're about to get theirs, but also, where did that pig come from? What is happening? And I would just, like, fall to pieces. I feel like that would be one of the hardest things about being a parent, is not laughing when you're supposed to be punishing your kid.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I have a child and I have much younger siblings, and there's been quite a few times when, you know, they curse or something, and it's hilarious to hear, you know, a little kid drop the F-bomb, and you're supposed to be serious, like, oh, don't you say that, and you're all like that's funny. like I remember, like, when my daughter was maybe 3 or so, we were at Target, and I told her that we had to go, and she kind of stomped her foot. She says, "No, kiss my ass." And I turned around because I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna pull myself together. Like, I'm not gonna try to figure out where she learned the phrase "kiss my ass" from, but
oh my god!
And I was like, yeah, you know what? We're not gonna say that right now. It's just, you know, that's all you can do is just, you know. I just hold it together. I mean, I've never seen her sledding with a pig, but, you know, I imagine that would be pretty hilarious.
Oh my god! I'm seeing a comment in the chat here, and I'm sorry, whaaaaaat. I'm not sure who that is, but whaaaaaat says, "Pa made me feel inadequate as a man." Ma seems she'll be like an interesting contrast to Little Women next month. True. Yes.
I was going to say, I'd imagine Pa probably makes a lot of modern men feel inadequate, because he is just constantly working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that, like, I feel like my father would have done really well in this era, because he was somebody who just didn't know how to sit still. And he would just be like, oh, God, I'm bored. I think I'm going to build a deck. And he'd just be like... All right, like, we wound up with a deck and, like, a big, like, water feature in the backyard with, like, koi fish in it. And it was not a big yard. Like, he shouldn't have been putting all this stuff in it, but he just needed shit to do, you know? And I imagine that this would have really agreed with him. There was always something that they needed to be doing. And I understand as a kid, especially being frustrated with Sundays and not getting to play and whatever. But I'm sure as an adult, there had to be a part of you that was like, oh, it's Sunday. Thank God. Literally.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. It's like, why can't you kids understand why I just want to sit and have some peace and quiet? Why?
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I could see finding irritating in that regard is, like, Ma's she's making a patchwork quilt and she isn't allowed to work on it. Things like that I could see, like, you just want to be able to do something to keep yourself a little busy, and you're not allowed, and that would be really frustrating. I mean, Pa talks about how when his father was a kid, or when he was a kid, I guess, that you weren't even allowed to, like, hook the horses up to the carriage because that was considered work, so you had to walk to church. Guys, we're being sticklers here a little bit for what constitutes work.
A little bit. You know? I can't imagine, you know, I'm not, like, a super, like, active person, but I can't imagine just sitting an entire day just doing nothing. I mean, it sounds kind of nice in theory, but you know, particularly when there is, you know, as in the, you know, with the Ingalls household, there's always something to be done. I mean, there's you know, always work to be done. There's always something they could be doing, but no, they're just kind of sitting and more or less just staring into space. I mean, I think they're allowed to read the Bible, maybe.
And there's, like, some book about animals that they can read.
Yeah, but
those
it's
are
also
the 2 books.
But it's also like a religious book, I think, like some sort of, like, you know, all the animals that God created or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other thing that gets me, too, is, like, you have to eat cold food because you're not allowed to cook. And just put it, like, it's winter. Let me have a stew or something that I left on the stove from yesterday, like a crock pot, But no, it's just like bread and cheese.
Yeah, and maybe an apple if you happen to sin that day.
So, okay, speaking of Ma being a badass, let's talk about Ma slapping a bear.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the best thing? I forgot this story completely. So when that moment when she's like, Laura, walk back to the house, and I'm like, why? And when I turn the page and I see that it's a bear, I'm like, oh shit! I did not remember this at all.
I think my favorite thing about this picture is how much clothing Laura is wearing. She looks like a lawn gnome. She's just
she does.
She's just covered. She looks like the little brother in A Christmas Story. Just so many layers of clothing.
I love how the bear is just turning to look at Ma like, the hell? You can't really see the expression on his face, but it's more just, it just feels like...
Yeah, it's like, lady, I didn't come here to get manhandled. Come on.
The hell? But yeah, she thinks it's the cow in the way of opening the gate, so she reaches over and gives her a smack to try and get her to move, and it's the fucking bear. And, thank goodness, because that the cow is still inside the barn, because apparently this bear was looking for some cow. This bear was like, ooh, I smell it. Where is it? And I have to imagine that happened to people. They'd wake up and their cow would be friggin' slaughtered by some bear in the night, and that must be quite a setback,
Particularly at this time of year when their bears just be hibernating and they're hungry as hell. So yeah, going back to the TV show, see, this is the kind of stuff that they didn't do. They made up their own sort of dramatic stories. I think they got progressively weirder. There was one that involved a kidnapping and I think there was a literal someone falling down a well plot.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. And of course the most famous one, if you go back and read about the history of the series, is when the show was canceled. The last episode of the series was literally Pa Ingalls blowing up the town. Just dynamiting buildings in the town.
Wait. What are you talking about?
When the show got canceled, Michael Landon, who played Pa Ingalls, the last episode was just him. I forget. There was a reason for it. He didn't just decide. He didn't just become the Mad Bomber or something. But it was I think he was protesting big city types moving into the town and ruining things. And I get it. I live in Brooklyn. I understand how gentrification works. It's a drag. But he blew up some buildings, and I think it was Michael Landon's protest over the show getting canceled. No.
Damn, son, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
What?
But yeah, so there wasn't really much in the way of kids, sledding and running into a pig. It was way more melodramatic, nighttime drama type stuff.
Yeah. I think that's what it was that put me off it when I watched it, because I think the episode I watched, there was something really over the top, and I don't specifically remember what it was, but I that was the vibe that I got, was they're trying to add extra drama in here when the whole thing is that their day-to-day life is dramatic, because anything goes wrong at any point and you're just screwed. And so I think as a little kid I even understood that was sort of what made the book so fascinating to me, and that they were kind of ignoring what I cared about in the stories. Yeah.
I mean, I guess, the kind of mundane day-to-day thing doesn't It doesn't translate well to television, I guess. I mean, I would have found it incredibly fascinating. I think that a modern audience would find it fascinating, because you look at how many shows like How It's Made and shows like that. People like watching that sort of, it's soothing to people to watch how something gets made. And I think, if they did show, if they did do a new version of the show that was maybe more in a sort of documentary style that shows in this passage, we talk about how Ma churns the butter and colors it. And here we're going to show somebody, how it's actually done. And I think people would love that now, but in the 70s it was all they were competing against stuff like Charlie's Angels and a lot of cop shows. And so no one was going to, even though it was intended for families, they still needed some sort of like punch up and drama and stuff like that.
Right.
And not like, the drama of a little kid stepping into a was it Hornets he got stung by? The cousin?
Yellow Jackets.
That's actually, that picture in that one is great. He's all bandaged up in the bed.
He looks like a little pig in a blanket.
He does, yeah.
Have you ever seen, there was I think it was an NPR, or not NPR, it's, what's the NPR TV version of NPR?
Oh, I can't think of it, but I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
They had a TV show for a little while, and I can't remember exactly what the name of it was. It was something like Frontier House or something like this. And it was basically like a reality show where they would take a family and tell them what they would need in the location that they selected for their homestead to make it through the winter. And then they would give them the, basic tools they would need to accomplish this and leave them. And there would be like a camera following their progress. But other than that, I don't feel like they were given much more than like the notice that they were going to be doing this. And so they had time to research ahead of time if they were so inclined. And other than that, they had to kind of like wing it and figure out how they would survive here. It was a fascinating show, and the way they would often judge, like what it came down to in the end, you would think it would be like how much food they'd put by for winter, but really it was almost always, do you have enough wood cut? Because you have to keep this fire going constantly for 7 months, practically, and do you have enough wood to make that happen before you freeze to death? And it was a really interesting show, and there was one family that was like, they clearly selected this family because they were such snobby, spoiled brats that they, in particular, in this situation, were not handling it well.
Right.
And kind of refused to even accept the judgment of the person who came and said, you would not make it through the winter. You have hardly half enough wood. And the guy was just like, well, I don't care what they say. I think we would have been fine, kind of thing.
It's like, no.
Right. And that's kind of what I would like. Is like if they did something that was sort of like that, like a combo reality show and documentary where we got to see like maybe somebody acting out part of the story from one chapter, and then a modern person who's like told, they don't get to watch the thing. They're told, well, this is how you do it. Go ahead. And we get to see them like fumble through it and try and make cheese and like what weird mixture they wind up with in the end that's like cheese-ish, or if their butter turns out to just be like, soup with like bits of carrot floating in it because they didn't know how to, I think that'd be really fun. That's what I'm here for.
Have you ever tried to do like anything like old timey? Because I've made my own butter, but I mean it doesn't really count because I made it in a mixer, so I didn't hand churn it. But that's like the closest I've ever come to. And I mean, and I know so like if you had to survive, what would be your skill? Like I can sew a little bit and I can bake bread. That's where my skills are. My skills are limited to that.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at most cooking. I would definitely need to learn how to like butcher animals, and as much as it would probably be difficult for me to like slaughter an animal, I feel like if it came down to it, I could do it.
If you're starving, I would imagine.
Well, I just mean like I don't like more than starving, just like that I'd have to get into like a headspace where I'm like, this is how it goes. This is like, I haven't had to do it, but somebody's been doing it for me. So I just need to suck it up. You know?
That's why I always say like I could never live on a farm because I would like personalize the animals too much, and I wouldn't be able to bring myself to slaughter them. I'd have to like hire someone for that express purpose, and then just like be gone for the day. And I think is in this one that they do have to slaughter a pig, and Laura like just won't. She has to hide because she had like kind of grown attached to the pig.
Yeah, she's like aware that they're going to have to do this, and she tries not to get too attached, but she can't help it. And then she like goes and hides her head under the pillow so she won't have to hear it squealing.
Yeah.
And Pa tries to assure her. He says, like, it doesn't even hurt them. It's over so quickly. And I'm like, I mean, it's probably over pretty quickly, but I can't say that you're being honest with her when you say it doesn't even hurt him. You're slitting his throat.
Yeah.
I'm sure it hurts him, you know?
For like a second. Yeah. I mean.
Right. Yeah, that one. And there was something else that, it was, it didn't wind up being an issue because both of the calves were female. But they were going to have to slaughter a calf for the rennet to make the cheese.
Right.
She is just like, are we seriously doing this, guys? And it turns out they can, because they're both female, he wants to keep them because they'll give milk. But he has to go over to his brother's, and his brother slaughters a calf. And it's like, no, yeah, you can use this. You can use our rennet. It's fine. Which, you know, she didn't have to meet that calf. But I do feel like they have artificial rennet now, right?
Right, yeah. They have vegetable rennet you can use now, yeah.
Because I worked on a goat farm for a while. And
I love goats. Oh my god. I'm sure you get that reaction a lot.
The bomb. Not as often as I wish.
Oh, that's amazing.
Most people are just like, you did? I'm like, yes.
I envy you. That's amazing. I went to a not to go off course, but I went to a painting with goats event last year.
Oh, nice.
And it was wonderful. I mean, who would think of just sitting there painting a cup and like just a goat just wanders by, and but this is the most chillest I've been in a long time. It was so peaceful.
Yeah, goats are really, and when I first started, of course, I was just kind of like, okay, they're all goats. I can tell they're goats. And then as I was like continuing on after a couple weeks, every single solitary one I grew immediately could recognize their face. They all looked very different by then. I was like, how could I not tell them apart? They're totally different faces. And their personalities, like there was one named Veronica who was such a bitch. Oh. And it was like you had to really like take time. Like you had to milk everybody else first because getting her to even come into the barn to be milked was such a friggin' chore. And you had to like give her extra food. So you also had to do it when they weren't watching because they could tell if somebody was getting more food than them. Like they would note that and like remember, I swear to God. So you had to like hide it from them. And that farm, there was a lot of them I had to milk by hand because some of them, they were older and the machines don't work as well. But there were plenty that got done by machine. And the milk would all go into this huge kettle where it was pasteurized throughout the morning. And then in the afternoon, I would go in there and I would make cheese in the cheese room. And I'm pretty sure we used vegetable rennet in that. And so, yeah, that is one of the only other things that I've made butter in like a mason jar where you shake it. It's not a butter churn proper. It took forever. But making cheese is pretty cool because we were starting with the same product, but we could make like 4 different types that were distinctly different from each other, which I found really interesting. Just depending on how much rennet you used and how much you pressed it and how much you let it like dry out as it was aging, it wound up to be wildly different textures and stuff like that.
Well, then you could be the town. You could be the town cheesemonger then.
Yeah. Goat herd and cheesemonger. But yeah, as far as like gardening, things like no.
Yeah, no, I'm a black thumb. I could not grow anything to save my life. Literally, I could not even.
Yeah, I feel like there's some things that you plant and they just sort of go. They do their thing like mint, you know, but you don't live on mint.
Mm-mm.
I'm like pumpkins. I don't know how hard those are to grow. I would imagine they're pretty hardy. But tomatoes are very finicky, right?
Yeah. Not
that they ate those. I don't remember those being talked about because they're nightshades. I think it took forever for people to like realize that those were safe. Anyway, so yeah, what we're talking about, a lot of that stuff is actually what comes up in the harvest chapter because I was thinking that summertime would be like the time of bounty, but it turns out like spring into early summer, Pa doesn't even hunt. Because he wants to let all of the baby animals grow. And I had assumed that once spring comes, you're like beginning to have fresh food again. But he's like, we're just going to have to deal with not having fresh meat until like late summer. And I was like, really? I didn't know that was how it went, you know?
When all those babies grow up nice and plump and juicy and delicious.
And I also, like, Pa is just so much more, he's just cooler than I remember. Like, there's that whole scene where he's talking about watching all the animals come, and he could have shot any number of them, and he just doesn't do it at the Salt Lick.
Yeah, he's very zen. He's very zen for the time period. He's like, I'm just going to let them do their thing.
Yeah, he keeps on just getting so fascinated with watching these animals that killing, like, and he feels kind of bad because he's like, I'm supposed to be providing for my family here. But of course he goes and tells his daughters about it because he knows that when he tells them, they're just going to be like, I'm really glad that you didn't shoot the deer. And he's going to feel better about not having deer meat for them today. And yeah, the dance. I really like the dance chapter.
Yeah, that's probably its most vivid. Is particularly focusing on what people are wearing and how different things are done. It's really a beautiful chapter.
The sugaring being such a focal point of it too. I always am like, and I've just always been fascinated by how much gatherings, like we make the excuse to party. Basically, right, as human beings. Mm-hmm. And this is a very practical thing that we're all doing, getting together to like do the sugaring and making the syrups and sugars and everything. But we're going to find a reason to have a party. And I kind of love that about people. You know, that we're like, we're going to make the best of this and have a really good old time. And grandma jigging, is that the best?
Yes. And then weird Uncle George, who's the one with the trumpet that just went by, and he's dancing with Laura, and I love that illustration.
Oh, it's so he had the way that his face is drawn. He really looks like a fairy or an elf.
Yeah, he looks like kind of otherworldly. Yeah, because that's how she saw him.
Yeah, he's wild. Is how Pa talked about him. Ever since he's come back from the war, he's wild. Now,
it's like, again, from a modern perspective, what does that mean? Does that mean that he's a little kind of, mentally off? Or it kind of, it's like what is he, that's kind of a euphemism for something now. You realize that. You're looking at it from, an adult perspective. Ever since, he hasn't been the same ever since he came back from the war,
Right, yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we know how that goes, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, like exactly how severe they meant that, because it seems like he's being perfectly normal at this party. Like Laura doesn't notice him acting strangely. He's just a little bit more excitable and energetic than a lot of other people are. But otherwise, there's nothing about his behavior that's like, seems off-putting to her at all. She really likes him by the end of the day and is like, actually, Uncle George is kind of my fave now. So yeah, I was curious about that too and what that exactly meant.
I mean, it could also mean, it could be something innocuous too, like he doesn't want to settle down and get married, or he's just kind of, out living his life after, having to, be very, regimental in the military. I mean, it's open to interpretation, but it is, it is rather cynical of me now to jump immediately to, he was actually like, had shell shock or whatever the terminology would have been after the Civil War. I think they used shell shock by then, but what I'm wondering if that's what that actually means. But it could just be something, innocent, but
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up though, because I was also curious about that. Going to town. Oh, this is my jam because it's so weird.
Where they have to leave at dawn to go to town.
I just and Laura's looking around at just the fact, like, one of my favorite lines is where is it? Some woman had spread out washing to dry on the bushes even though it was not Monday. Which is like, I just love that because it really does underline for me what it is like as a kid, that you think the way that your family does things is the way things are done. You don't get it yet, that your family has just chosen something and that's their choice. And that's it. It's only the thing that they do. And the fact that she's so like, but it's not Monday. Like, genuinely, like, that's weird. It just is such a nice little childlike moment to me, you know?
I like when she's so amazed by this town that has a couple houses and a store, and it's like one street, and they go through, and Pa's like, well, that's Pepin.
Yep.
You know, and Laura's carrying on like she's like in the middle of Times Square, just like agape at everything.
She says at one point she could have looked for weeks and not seen everything that was in that store. And I'm like, I am sure that's not true. You probably could have had another 20 minutes and you'd be all right.
That picture, right, there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, he's selling fabrics, he's selling pots and pans, he's selling a big old bag of salt. There's a lot happening. There's a lot going on there.
Big old bag of salt. Yeah, So, okay, this friggin' shopkeeper, though, like, what the fuck? Because he's the one, he says, that's a pretty little girl you've got there, and he admired Mary's golden curls, but he did not say anything about Laura or about her curls. They were ugly and brown. Like, shopkeeper, if there are two little girls, fucking compliment both little girls. What is wrong with you?
Stop it. That's true. That is true.
Ugh. I got so mad about it because, of course, Laura already does not think that she's as pretty as Mary. And then everybody's over here fucking saying that same thing. And later on, Mary says something about how, well, everybody knows that brown is better, or that golden is better than brown anyway. And Laura slaps her. And I was like, low key, go Laura.
Exactly.
Fuck this girl. Ugh. Who says that? And the fact, it always burned me up that Laura gets punished for slapping Mary, but Mary never gets punished for saying something so shitty. You know?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, she's literally the golden child.
Ugh, I hate it. But yeah, it's just like, this was something that, even though I knew it was, even as a kid, I knew that it was meant to be, well, this is how I saw myself. I'm not saying that brown is actually ugly. I'm just saying that was how I felt about my own hair. It just always bummed me out because there are certain things that you don't realize you're supposed to think are less than until somebody tells you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think I was still young enough that the idea that blonde is preferable to brunette, I didn't know yet. So it wasn't so much that it made me feel like the author was saying that my hair wasn't pretty, so much as the realization that maybe the world doesn't think my hair is as pretty.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that, and that sucks.
And yeah, and it's interesting that's been such a deeply ingrained, I mean, I think it's something that's kind of, you moved on to spoil coast now, so it's like everybody, the thing is that redheads are better than everybody else, and right. But for, even, in the 1860s, there was a preferred hair color for women, which is, both funny and sad at the same time, because when you think about it, back in the 1860s, there was nothing you could do about your hair color. I mean, at least like from like the 40s on, you could just change your hair color if you didn't like it. But I mean, if you were just stuck with mousy brown hair or whatever, however it was perceived by the world at large, there's nothing you could do about it. And that's why they sold fascinators and bonnets and stuff like that, just to make your hair look better.
That's true, huh? And plus, I guess people couldn't bathe as often, so we needed hats to cover up the fact that our hair was nasty.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. I think in Farmer Boy, I think they mentioned they bathed like once a week, but because it was a chore. Like they had to pour out the water and then heat the water for the next kid, and there were like 6 kids in the house, and then it was just a process.
Yeah, that's something that when people talk about, like, what would be one of the most difficult things about, like, if you were to time travel to the past, I have always said it would be, for me, a combination of, like, hot baths are almost non-existent unless you are very wealthy, and fabric is all scratchy.
Exactly.
Everything's very uncomfortable.
And they did not have Woolite to make that better.
No, and there was, like, they didn't brush their fabric to give it a soft surface so that it was just things like that I'm always just like, man, I love the modern age that I can get into a hot bath 10 minutes after I finish this podcast and then climb into the softest pajamas I have ever owned in my life that I got for like $15 at Walmart and just be like, I'm in a cloud. I'm literally like in a cloud. This isn't like, moments like that are worth not having fresh butter and bread for. I think I love food so much, but yeah, when it comes down to it, I think I would sacrifice certain foods in exchange for baths and soft clothes.
Yeah,
that would outweigh it.
Yeah, I think I'd be alright without smartphones and all. Just I need to be able to have hot water. I need hot water.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. I want to make sure that because we only have a little time left. Is there any other story out of these that you really wanted to touch on before we?
Well, this chapter ended with Laura ripping her pocket out of her dress, and it's such a poignant moment because she's crying in the picture, and it just looks, my heart breaks looking at this picture, and Pa's is like, well,
yeah,
he's kind of got that, that shit happens, kid, don't worry about it, but she's just devastated that she got greedy and put too many shiny rocks in her pocket and tore right off her dress.
Yeah, and she thinks that she's going to be in big trouble because she's ruined her best dress. And it turns out that it's just the seam came apart. And Ma's like, I'll be able to fix it and you won't even be able to tell. But I totally relate to that panic as a kid with thinking that you've ruined something really important.
Yeah, it's like, oh shit, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had one time I pulled a glass right out of the dishwasher and poured cold orange juice in it and it shattered.
Oh my God.
And I panicked, because I hadn't done anything. I was like, I just poured, and I remember like being close to tears and my mom coming in because she heard it in the next room and was like, what happened? I was like, I don't know. I just took it out of the dishwasher. And she immediately was like, oh no, that's not your fault. That'll happen if something's still really hot and you mix it with cold. So just don't do that. Wait for it to cool off a little next time. And I was like, wait, that just happens? If it's hot and you just put cold, it just breaks? And I remember being almost betrayed by that, feeling like, well, first of all, somebody should have told me.
Yeah.
And second of all, how does that work? What? Yeah.
But yeah, I like how she describes it a dreadful thing, and again, you're looking at this from the perspective of a 5-year-old. So yeah, that's just think about what a wonderful time in your life it was when the worst possible thing that could happen is you tore the dress that Mom made for you. That's what a wonderful, what a blissfully innocent time that was.
I really miss those days, man.
Right, I know.
I do remember being able to be, entertained by so little. I could be left alone for hours. I didn't have brothers or sisters, and I was fine. I would make up stories, and I would pretend that I was, talking to the fairies in the garden and stuff, especially my grandma's. Now... I can't manage, man. I can't be alone for 10 minutes before I'm just like, okay, I need Netflix.
Totally.
I need Facebook.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, funnily enough, when I was a kid, I had siblings, but they were much younger than me, so I was still on my own a lot. I actually pretend to be Lauren Goes Wilder a lot, and
yes.
and you just ran around in the woods near my house, and pretend to be looking for bars and all, and now it's just pretending. What? Well, there's so much television to be watching,
Right? Yes. Yeah, why would I make something up when somebody's made something up for me? I don't have to even do any of that work. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
The honey bear.
And again, look at that face. He's like, oh, yeah.
He's sticking his arm all the way in there. He is so excited. I feel a little bit bad that Pa, interrupted, but it seems like Pa gave him a chance to really, get a couple good bites in before he interrupted.
I just love that face. Love that face. That bear could not be more pleased with himself.
But yeah, that is, again, there's a lot of sugar they go home and like eat honey. Like, okay, I'm going to read this and tell me if I'm wrong. Where is the part? Okay, I made a big racket. He's talking about how he like got the bear away so that he could take the honey out of the tree. This is too far on, because they go inside and she says, oh, here it is. For dinner, they all had as much of the delicious honey as they could eat. That's it.
The big old bowl of honey.
That's it. That's foul.
Yeah, I mean, I will take it in my tea, but I mean, just having a big old spoonful of honey, no thank you.
Not unless I have a cough or something and I need, but I wanted her to be like honey on bread at the minimum, which like even that's not dinner. But okay, I would be all right with it. But yeah, it just makes it sound like they just go grab honeycomb and gnaw on it at the table. But between that and the maple syrup, they have a lot of sugar in that house.
Well, they need all that energy so they can keep working.
It's true, yeah. Harvesting. So here's the story with the yellow jackets that you were talking about. This kid.
Charlie. He's such a little turd.
Do you remember this as a kid, like running into kids that were like allowed to talk back to their parents in a way that shocked you? Yeah. It's the kind of thing that you're just like, why are you being like this? Like, and I enjoy that Laura and Mary are both shocked at how this little boy is allowed to behave. But then he like really gets his, and Pa on the way home is flat out like, yeah, good. He deserves it. I was just like, damn, Pa.
He looks fucking dead in that picture. It's hilarious.
He does. He looks like a body. They wrap him up in these sheets and blankets, like covered in mud, to soothe the stings all over his body. And the way the story goes, for those who aren't familiar, is that he keeps on distracting Pa and his own father in the fields when they're supposed to be rushing to get all of this harvesting done, because it's going to rain and that's going to ruin the crop if they don't have it done. And he keeps on like yelling and screaming like something's happening, and then when they run over to him, they're like, he immediately is like, ha ha, gotcha. But then finally he does start screaming later on, and they ignore him because they figure he's just fucking with them again. And lo and behold, he's stepped on a yellow jacket nest and is being stung all over his body. And nobody came to help him because they just didn't think that he was serious. And and then he gets covered in mud and wrapped up like a friggin' burrito. And I wonder how long he had to stay like that. Like,
and did they just like load him onto the wagon at the end of the day?
I just can't, like, I would imagine, well, I mean, it's sort of similar to like going to a spa now and getting a mud wrap, right? Where if you have to use the bathroom, you're kind of screwed. They have to completely undo everything and, or not, and then clean that up later on, which I'm not sure if that is how they would handle this or not. But, this picture really is something. Oh, whaaaaaat in the comments says that picture cries out for a meme.
Yeah, I feel like it says like don't want no shit, don't start no shit, don't be no shit or something.
Right. I feel like I could see something with like anti-vaxxers.
Oh, yeah.
There's a bunch of children and what looks like a corpse, but
oh god.
I was gonna leave that there. But yeah, that's a pretty good story. I can't help but wonder how true it is, because it does work out so perfectly, but I'm fine with it. I'll let it go. I'll pretend it's true. I want to believe it. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with a lot of online stories where people are like, yeah, this definitely happened. And I'm like, even if it didn't, can you just let me have this?
Yeah, I mean, it's still amusing. I mean.
Yeah. And then there's the thresher machine. And this one I found interesting because it's a similar thing to the town where like Laura and Mary are overwhelmed by all of the noise that it makes because they've never been around a machine ever.
Right.
And that's just one of those, like, of course they would be overwhelmed, because think about, like, how much noise. They've been around max, like, 20 people at once, ever. And the most noise would be people talking and musical instruments and maybe, like, occasional, like, tool sounds.
God, how nice must be? Because I live in New York, and it's. I mean, my immediate neighborhood is pretty quiet, but as soon as you like step off the train in like Manhattan, it's just a barrage of noise, just nonstop noise, and it's just I can't even imagine, what it must be like to just be overwhelmed by the sound of a machine.
And it's not even like a gas powered, like it's literal horsepower.
Yeah, so it's probably like a grinding gear noise or something. That's probably about the extent of it.
And it turns out that it's Pa that went and like found this thing, this thresher, and convinced everybody to like go in together to use it. And he says, let's see, it would have taken Henry and Peterson and Pa and me a couple of weeks apiece to thresh as much grain with flails as that machine threshed today. We wouldn't have got as much wheat either, and it wouldn't have been as clean. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that Pa is just so open-minded to like trying out new things, that he's the one that's spearheading that sort of stuff in the neighborhood. I just like Pa. Like, Caroline's got good taste. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, she did. She done good.
Yeah. So okay, it's beginning to get cold again, and we have this this ending moment of Pa telling them about like not killing the deer. I think, that's the story. How he was the deer are the third ones, because the first thing was there was a buck, and he doesn't kill the buck because he's just so beautiful that Pa just sits and looks at him, and then it walks away. And then a bear comes, and he's like, that bear was just so awesome, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. And then he's like, all right, whatever comes up next, I'm going to do it. Swear to God. And then it's like a mama deer and her baby deer. And he's like, oh, no, I'm not going to do this one either. And it all just made me like Pa even more.
Yeah, he's like, again, to keep going back to I know you didn't really see the series, but I can't help comparing the two. Like, as Michael Landon played him, and of course he had this like ridiculous hair, and he kind of played him sort of like a very Alan Alda sensitive man kind of role. It didn't really quite work because it was coming from a very modern, modern in 1976 or so take. Right. But here he was just he was very and Almanzo, Laura's husband, eventual husband, was very much of the same mold. They were hardworking men who clearly loved their wives, which was like one of the I don't recall if this was mentioned in the book. I don't think it was, but a great story about Almanzo Wilder is that Laura, the real Laura, she's called Half Pint in the book, so she references being short, but as an adult, she barely reached 5 feet tall. And
I didn't know that.
She was a tiny little woman, and Almanzo, I think, stood about a foot taller than her. And when they were building their house, he built her a custom kitchen with low counters, so that it would be easier. Oh. It would be now. Granted, she was still doing the lion's share of the household chores, because again, that's just the way it was. But he did make an effort to make it easier on her by making everything sized for a short woman. So like the cabinets were lower, the counters were lower, everything was built to make the work easier on her. So it's they're both very much in the same mold, like of the time, but also thinking about their wives in a way that maybe a lot of other men in the time period really didn't. And Pa has sort of the sensitivity and respect for the natural world that certainly by the late 1800s a lot of men were not, and particularly men who were interested in expanding the city and exploring kind of just spreading out across the country. Obviously we know how American history went, and there was a lot of disrespect for the law of the land and nature, but I think that I'm sure that Pa would have been appalled to see, how the Native Americans were eventually treated. Even if even if he he himself interfered in their land.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That assessment of him, and it makes me want to reread the rest of them just to see more. Like, the only thing that I could never really get behind with Pa was his wanderlust. He always wanted to continue moving out further west, and that was something I just couldn't understand. I was like, man, find a place and fucking stay there and figure it out. Like, why do you keep doing this? It's traveling is hell. Resettling somewhere and building a whole new place to live is hell. Can't you just... And in that sense, even though I didn't like Ma, even as a little girl, I really felt for her. Because even Laura is sort of feeling the same way as her Pa, in wanting to explore and continue to move out. And I just couldn't really, I part of it was probably just me wanting more stories like this, where instead of them traveling, it's Ma making cheese and butter. But yeah, this makes me want to continue reading them. And it ends with a paragraph that I didn't really realize how sort of off tone it is from the rest of the book, but it's profound in its very small way. Pa is playing Auld Lang Syne on the fiddle, and Laura asks, "What does that mean?" And he says, "They are the days of a long time ago." But Laura lay awake a little while, listening to Pa's fiddle softly playing and to the lonely sound of the wind in the big woods. She looked at Pa sitting on the bench by the hearth, the firelight gleaming on his brown hair and beard and glistening on the honey-brown fiddle. She looked at Ma, gently rocking and knitting. She thought to herself, "This is now." She was glad that the cozy house and Pa and Ma and the firelight and the music were now. They could not be forgotten, she thought, because now is now. It can never be a long time ago.
Yeah, that's philosophical for a 6-year-old.
Right. And it's sort of in comparison to the rest of the book, it feels very different, right? It's a surprising way to end it, I feel like.
Yeah. It says she's definitely, closing with the perspective of look, because she was, for inspiration for all us writers out there, Laura Ingalls Wilder was 65 when this book was published, and it was her first.
Wow.
It was her first book, and I think it's a sort of touching and bittersweet way to end a book written by someone about something that happened to her literally 60 years earlier, and how she would at that time she would have never thought that would be so far in the past.
Yeah, I didn't realize that she was that old when it was first published, but wow, yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, yeah, so I just want to read the rest of them now. I might do that. The thing is that I tend to do audiobooks most of the time, and I was planning to do that with this one because the audiobook's only 3.5 hours long, and I was like, I can get through that in a day doing some housework and stuff. But it's read in a very deliberate way meant for children that I wasn't anticipating. So the sample is Ma always said, wash on Monday, bake on Tuesday, laundry on Wednesday. And it's very slow. And I was like, all right, no, can't do this.
I'm tired just reading this.
Right, a little bit. So I'm like, if it's the same narrator, it may take me a while to get to the other books because I won't be able to do the audiobooks for those. I'm going to have to actually sit down and read them. And Lord knows I ain't got time to sit down and read much outside of what I do for the show. But this is just, I'm gratified that you reread them so often.
I do. They're comfort food. They're just so so peaceful, and I mean they're all good. Again, the later books aren't bad. They're just different. They're very different in tone. They're more realistic. They're more things start to get a little bleak. Particularly when you find out how things worked out in real life too. Just how there was a lot of a lot of sadness in her life. And when you compare it to the carefree days of youth, which of course is true for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people, sometimes their happiest days of their life are in their childhood. Not everybody, but and when you look back, in adults, at the simplicity of all it, it's like, I used to be entertained by, a bunch of, dolls made out of paper or little paper clothes and all that. It's like, I could, you could have given me a piece of paper and like 6 crayons and I would have been absolutely fine. Now it's like, if I don't have my phone in my hand, I feel naked, and it just, how did that happen?
Magical machine.
Yeah. How did that happen? I would have never imagined.
Is there anything else that you wanted to, do you want to give a plug for your show before we wrap up?
Well,
and tell everybody where to find you again?
As I said, I am the co-host of the Kill by Kill podcast. We talk about horror movies, focusing on the characters and some of the weird little details. We spent over 2 years going over the entire Friday the 13th franchise, and we just recently got into the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, so you can just find us online at Kill by Kill. I have my own website, GenaRadcliffe.com, in which I write about old television, surprisingly not Little House on the Prairie, although I may hit up that episode in which they blow up the town. I'm going to send you the link, because I don't think you believe me, and I'm totally not making it up. And I write about old TV and movies and pop culture, and I'm also a writer at The Spool, in which I recently reviewed the new season of True Detective, The Umbrella Academy, some movies and television. You can find me on the Facebooks and on Twitter. I'm under Porcelain72 on Twitter.
Porcelain72.
Porcelain72.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this. This was a lot of fun to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And folks, you know where you can find me. Facebook.com/unspoiledpod, Twitter at unspoiledshow, Instagram at unspoiledpodcast. In terms of the book club for next month, the main book is going to be Crazy Rich Asians, which I have not yet read. And the March childhood favorite is Little Women. So that's going to be what's coming up for March. So get those if you have not yet read them, and get on it. And I'm just excited for Little Women, too, because that's a particular favorite of mine. Looking forward to it. Thank you again, Gena, very much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody who's in the chat here, for coming and hanging out with us.
Yay, thank you.
And we'll see you next month with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Bye.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.